Right, now, if you were to change your habitual thoughts in one target area for the maximum possible gains and improvements across the whole of your life, it would be changing and improving your habitual thoughts about you. And this is because even though most of us don't tend to stop and think about the way that we think about ourselves and internally speak to ourselves, it's so incredibly fundamental to the way that we feel and function day to day. And part of the reason for this is because these ideas, which you assume to be true about yourself, not only have a huge effect on feelings of self-worth and confidence and self-esteem, but it's also because the beliefs we have about ourselves lay the foundations for so many of our other core beliefs and assumptions about life. So they affect our behaviours in so many different areas. So you may have habitual thoughts and behaviours around health or career or finances or relationships, but the quality and the nature of these thoughts and behaviours are hugely influenced first by your core beliefs about yourself. So improving the things that you habitually think about yourself and the way that you internally speak to yourself helps with not only confidence and self-esteem, but it can have a lot of other surprising benefits across the board of life in general. So it's no coincidence that so many people struggle with self-esteem and critical self-talk, and there are a few specific factors which are kind of against us in terms of how judgmental we are towards ourselves. And some of the others I'll get into on another video, but I wanted to talk today about one particular one, which is how highly suggestible our infant brains are. In fact, the brainwave pattern which is associated with a highly suggestible hypnotic state is the same as our dominant brainwave pattern before the age of around 7 years old. So because of the way that our brains work when we're young, we soak up and absorb and internalize comments and criticisms even when they're not objectively true. So this is where a lot of the judgments and labels that we kind of tag ourselves with now, this is where they originated from. You might have heard a saying that's something along the lines of that voice in your head, that's mean to you all the time, isn't really your voice. And that's true, and here's why. So most of us know the foundations of our identity are built in early childhood. Okay, so that's fine. What's the problem with that? Well, this means that we're forming our identity at a time when our brains just so happen to be designed to act like sponges to our environment. And that's because as an evolutionary necessity, we need to absorb a lot of information at a very rapid rate to learn how to survive in our immediate environment. So that sounds great. Our brains can soak up lots of information when we're children. The catch, though, is that this all happens before the region of our brain which is responsible for analytical, critical thinking has matured, which means we tend to accept and absorb ideas with much less analysis when we're young. So we don't have the same sort of cognitive ability to evaluate how objectively true or accurate or helpful these ideas are. And this means that when we're exposed to ideas about ourselves in infancy, these ideas, including labels and more negative assessments and judgments, are very often automatically accepted in the brain and then held as hard facts. Not always and not everything, but a lot. So these ideas and labels could come from something you were directly told, like, you're so difficult, you're so lazy, you're so loud, or they could come from something that you overheard. So, maybe a family member or a teacher telling someone in front of you, so-and-so really struggles with this, or she's very shy, or, he's always causing trouble. And they could also be ideas that are just subtly inferred, so never directly said to you, but subliminally suggested. So, maybe a parent always acting in a way that suggested that you couldn't be trusted, or couldn't do things for yourself, or just felt like you were always getting things wrong or being a disappointment in some way. A negative judgment of yourself could also just as easily come from things that were not said. If there was a lack of, acceptance or acknowledgement or appreciation, or it could just be the absence of anything. If you had absent parents, it might just be your infant brain interpreting the idea that whatever I do, it doesn't really matter. And so I don't really matter because no one's really paying attention. And these ideas can come from anyone. So many will have come from a key attachment figure like a parent, but it could also be an offhand comment by, a teacher or even a peer that just hit the right spot on the right day, and so for whatever reason it seemed believable, so you absorbed that message and believed it to be true. How valid the comment and how well qualified someone is to give it to you doesn't necessarily matter at that age, because your brain hasn't matured enough to properly evaluate and analyse that information in the way that you'd be much more likely to do now. So if someone says something to you or about you now, you're a bit more likely to kind of review the evidence and compare it to other information you have, mull it over and then decide how accurate it is. But as children, we don't really have the same processing tools to be able to do that. And so we also have certain beliefs about ourselves that come from very naturally absorbing the messages of our environment. So that could be anything from family and peers and local community to the world at large. So, for example, you have a lot of Barbie doll figures as a child and you're sort of surrounded by Barbie doll figures, or you watch TV shows where, you know, all of the characters are aesthetically altered and enhanced, or maybe you were surrounded by very academically gifted siblings and, you know, you were the more creative one. It's such a natural and automatic way of understanding ourselves when we're young to use comparison to give us some context to who we are and where we fit into it all. But unfortunately, we're also really bombarded with unrealistic, unhelpful, and very distorted images and ideas of what is acceptable or ideal, and, you know, this chips away at our self-image from a pretty tragically young age. So that's where some of these more critical ideas about ourselves are initially planted. But what happens next is the really deceptive bit, because once those ideas are planted in your brain, they begin to direct and determine some of your behaviours. So by the nature of the way that our brains work, we are walking, talking, self-fulfilling prophecies. So once you've adopted an idea about yourself and internalized it as part of your identity, wherever that idea came from, you know, however flawed the source, your brain uses that information to help inform your decisions and your behaviors. And what it also does is it begins to look for more information that is like it, which is called confirmation bias. So it's our brain's tendency to seek out and literally scan for information and evidence and experiences which correlate with existing beliefs and cognitive frameworks, so outlooks and perspectives. And so then we really believe it to be true, because now we've not only heard it from somewhere as an infant, but we have witnessed ourselves act in just that way, or now we're seeing it everywhere, this clear evidence of our shortcomings or our inadequacy, because our brain is literally seeking out that information and highlighting it for you because it correlates with the belief that you already have, which is so lovely. Thanks, brain. But the more positive part of all this is that it works both ways. So if you provide new ideas and plant and install new suggestions and beliefs about yourself, the same thing happens. So you begin to naturally act on that identity, and your brain continues its bias, you know, seeking out evidence and experiences that will support your beliefs. But these are positive, empowering beliefs and ways of thinking that will help you. And so that's what we do in these sessions. We combine cognitive restructuring, which is an evidence-based CBT method, with hypnosis to create and embed new thoughts and new ideas about yourself. One thing that can sometimes feel a bit off-putting about this kind of work is the prospect of having to revisit some of the difficult or, you know, painful experiences that planted these ideas about yourself in the first place. But in cognitive behavioral therapy, we work directly with the beliefs. So we work with the beliefs and thoughts that those old events created, rather than focusing on the source of those beliefs and dwelling on those originating events. We look at what is the belief or what is the pattern of thinking now, because that is the kind of hangover, that's the residue that's causing problems or limitations for you now. So you're not put in a position where you're expected to relive those experiences or, quite sort of dwell on those events quite as heavily as you might do with some other models of therapy. But the reason I like to highlight the fact that many of our thoughts and ideas about ourselves came from these originating childhood events and early experiences isn't to get, too sort of distracted and lost in what the experiences were, but to demonstrate the fact that our thoughts are not facts. And just because you think something about yourself on a regular basis doesn't mean that it's true or that it's an innate, fixed thing within yourself. We do have certain innate qualities and kind of, unique flavours of character that we're all born with. So we definitely do have certain predispositions, absolutely. But it's our environment and the suggestions that we absorb from it from an early age which determine whether those innate qualities that we're born with are given positive labels and associations and kind of nurtured into something positive and useful, or kind of labelled as bad or wrong and, misunderstood and mismanaged into something more problematic. And that's the bit that we can do something about now. We can offer ourselves new suggestions and new beliefs which can reframe how we view our predispositions and, more innate characteristics into something useful and unique and positive. So wherever you are on the spectrum in terms of your current thinking patterns about yourself, whether it's correcting some of those early misunderstandings to just ease the pain of thinking and saying horrible things to yourself all the time, because as they say, it's really hard to be happy when someone's being mean to you all the time, even if that person is you. Or if things, are generally pretty good, but you want one tweak that's going to, seriously kind of impact and accelerate your life, I would say this would be a really important one. I think that changing your thoughts about yourself is such a foundational shift in your thinking that if I could help change anyone's beliefs about anything, despite the fact that I do this work in a lot of areas, it would always be changing their core beliefs about themselves. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to get in touch, or you can head to the bookings page to book in your free phone consultation, and I look forward to seeing you soon.